Summer fall, seasons change, we still keep it together.
Hey, Beverly Hills 90210 fans! Are you ready to dive deep, episode by episode, storyline by storyline, character by character, as we break down the making of your favorite zip code? With your hosts, Charles Rosin.
Did I say that?
Yeah. Harry
all this
Mullen.
foolish thing about the real person, and we're going, what? We're getting rid of this guy.
Pete Ferriero.
I'm feeling wonderful. Kathleen looks TV crush-worthy.
Like so many special guests. And all your questions. Live on the Beverly Hills 90210 show. Oh, yeah.
Well, here we are back again on the Beverly Hills.
2022.
Back again. Chuck, it's good to have you here. I know you're very busy these days. You're going on a trip and whatnot. Let's go back. Holidays. We did the big holiday show. How are you feeling all through the holidays? Everything good?
The holidays were good. Yeah, we were able. We went down to the desert, be with another family, be with Lindsay, my grandchildren, and Lindsay and Josh. And of course, while I was there, the first night we arrived, I was told that my nephew, who I was with 2 days before, had come down with COVID. So I spent the first day with Karen trying to find a place where we could get urgent care and get the tests in the Coachella Valley. But still, there's something about if you reach a certain point in life, like I just did. Now I'm officially old, like Larry. Before I was on the cusp.
Right.
We are the two. But still, no matter what your one's age, I can still rely on the slogan that got us through making 90210, which we've talked about it. Beverly Hills 90210, helping to keep America immature.
Exactly.
And I certainly like an immature country better than an angry one.
For sure. You're good, right? No COVID. Everything was fine with that.
Feeling good. My daughter's moving up to San Francisco. I'm getting very involved with Venice politics. We had a very interesting session at my house the other day with one of the mayoral candidates and with some of the neighbors here in Venice, being able to tell her why we all feel persecuted in our own ways. And we made a big impression. And so that was a good, worthwhile day. And but now I'm back in the zip code. So, hey.
That's it. Exactly. I mean, this is a fun episode. We just watched it a little bit earlier on Patreon. There's a lot of things happening. It's a transition episode. We're going to get into all the different points, but Babette and Jackie have this cocaine thing, and Mel is cheating, and Duke makes his appearance, and Dylan needs to decide. So there's a lot of things happening. Why don't you set us up and tell me where you are in the world of 90210 at this time period, season 3? This is the middle. I think it's the middle of the season. So Midlife Now What is also somewhere in the middle as well. So
I think so. I don't have, unfortunately, forgive me, I don't have we did my office, my desk, so I don't have all my papers in front to compare ratings and things along those lines. But it certainly was a period of time that, we had gone up, we were in the 28, 29. That was, so you were in about episode 13, 14, 15, 16, those numbers. And this one was really and we wait to the very last scene to know this, but in every capacity, what this is that things are getting, as we say, set up. So working from the back to the front, we set up that, oh my God, we end with a news report that interrupts a basketball game that Brandon is betting on, that Jack McKay has been released from federal prison 2 years early. We, for the first time, as we're at the spa, that Kelly starts to look at her body in a different way and is not happy with what she sees, which sets up the arc that is perfectly perfect. and some of the other issues that would come up not only in season 3 but certainly season 5, having to do with modeling and things like that, body image.
I think
And
it's something that carries
stays
through
with the whole
Kelly.
thing,
Kelly's whole
season, right?
yeah,
Right.
the whole series too. Yeah.
And you said, like, with Duke coming, so it's the beginning of here's a guy who is a bookie, and with our friend Billy Vera, so that gets set up, but and dealing, and of course one that really lasts into the 4th year is that Mel, and that in the gossip mill, you always, people like to gossip or hear gossip, and who, traditionally, it's masseuses can talk a lot, or I can tell you a funny side story on that when we want, but also that masseuses talk a lot, and the haircutters do, because they're with people, and gossips are gossips, and this was supposed to be the kind of spa. Originally we wanted to do it like a Miraval or something in the desert like that. So we had to create this urban spa. And, I was a little critical when we started out. I was saying to you, Pete, we had to go to the Lowe's Hotel. It was just built, we couldn't find the kind of look, the old LA look I was looking for. Didn't matter. I mean, I think that, again, you fans will remember that oftentimes we have our set deck had Jill Henkel on this show, and she went just on fire on this one. And
there's no way to know that it was a hotel. It looks like a spa resort that was set up. I would never even realize it was the Lowe's. So
yeah.
it was just a credit to both Drew and Jill and on
the whole
Tom Victor,
team.
the whole team. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So so it was a very LA episode, because what do people gossip about? They gossip about sex. They gossip about sex and money. And so this is and I think there's and then we were looking through the idea that when we find out that this is that in a tradition what went on a lot in Beverly Hills, and probably still go on, that there's another stereotype, that dentists fool around with their patients or their nurses or whatever, and we go right to that with our oral surgeon Mel Silver, because he's the object of this stuff. And then, of course, speaking of fooling around, Jim in the episode before hired a very good-looking assistant and starts to fantasize like a midlife crisis. So we've got midlife stuff going all over. The fact that I had turned 40 while we were doing this episode had no bearing on any of that.
No, it did not. So you you weren't going through.
I would know nothing about midlife. not at this point, anyway. The end of the decade, maybe, yes, but not at this point.
Right. This is still, you're just speculating on what it might be like. But I mean, I'm sure that okay, Larry told me in last week that at the start of every season, they would go and the whole group would sit down and talk about what's going to happen this season. Were you doing that in season 3? Get the Jessica and Steve and everybody sort of together and go through what might be happening? Was that something you guys did? Everybody
together? No. Jessica and Steve, yes. Remember, Darren had left at the start of season 3. We had 2 new writers we picked up, but we didn't give them anything to do to episodes 9 and 10. High Wire, the one where it has a lot to do with the pressure of going to college, and which Mr. Spelling hated the episode, by the way, and because it had to do with going to college, and of course Home and Away, with the about the football game that gets canceled because of gun violence, and that was Chip Johannesson. So who became a mainstay of those kind of meetings that Larry would be talking about. But I was a little, showrunners who are strong showrunners, I think, are there because they're writers. If you're a non-writing showrunner, that's a whole other process. But if you're a writing showrunner, then you kind of know after a while what you need to do to string the stuff along. And I didn't really need a whole room. I ran my show. I think we've talked about it. I ran my show very differently. Even when Larry came in season 4 and everybody, we would have a morning meeting usually when we would discuss what was going on with the writing and what was this and where we were at and other matters. But then when new stories were being broken, sure, I weighed in on the kind of things that I liked, an A story, a B story, a C story, but I wanted people to break away in small groups, do their work, and come back in 5 hours.
Right.
I didn't feel I needed to supervise every second going on, and most showrunners do for whatever reason. Whether you become a showrunner and you immediately become power hungry or anal or whatever. But I just wanted to get through the day, and the only way to get through my complicated days with the amount of writers and producers we had was to delegate. But know that if something doesn't work out in the process of delegation, that it was on my shoulders to fix it.
Right. And nobody else's, because you were the one.
Well, or to turn to people for help and say, hey,
Sure.
we got to do this. But it was on the decisions and all of that. So no, we didn't have that big one. I mean, we may have in general people, what did they like to do? Just like I did with the actors.
Sure.
But, we'd have lists and then we'd mix and match. But this one was a little, season 3, you've heard me also say on these podcasts that I actually ran 5 different television shows.
Right.
So this one is the, senior year. And so we knew that things pertaining to graduation were going to be there at the back end. So we knew where we were going in it. It wasn't having to manufacture.
Right.
That all the elements that happened within it, Brenda deciding to go to school in Minnesota, otherwise, that those kind of things are the details. But the general, at least you have a place to hang some of your storylines and best lines of dialogue and character moves, et cetera, et cetera.
So moving into this season, I guess the big explosion, literally with Jack McKay, is one of the things that you're going to go to this season, right? Is that where you're sort of, and we'll do this thing with Jack McKay.
Well, we knew there was going to be a triangle.
That too.
How the triangle worked out, we knew how to do it in the summer episodes.
Sure.
It didn't really happen. Let's bury it. I again didn't realize I had forgotten about the triangle that they made a point that Kelly and Dylan didn't sleep together that night.
Right.
I would have I think we would have done better just to in 2020 hindsight, just to not deal with that and let the audience wonder one way or the other, rather than immediately let them know that. And I'm sure that was a concession I had to make to the network, or
sure,
Mr. Spelling or somebody. It took away the fun of did she or didn't she?
Yeah.
Which I think also was, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this. When you tell somebody, then you know what's been done, and so there isn't the fervor around it.
Sure. All right, let's look at some of these different things. The first one we'll look at is Jim Walsh's secretary, who is the actress is Paula Tricky. We were talking about her before. She is stunning, then and now. You said in the Patreon, and maybe you can kind of talk about this. People come in and audition, and they come and read, and all the time. And this one got your attention. Paula Tricky gets your attention for
yes. She, for whatever reason, I'm really, personal to TMI here, but I'm very attracted to people with dark hairs. Of course, I marry a redhead, but nonetheless, I guess I'm attracted to all women. Let's face it.
Fair enough.
But there's something about a woman with a black, it's always been that, and and people came in different ways, and just where they dress in the outfits and this. I can't remember what Paula Tricky was wearing. There may have been a bare midriff involved. I'm not 100% sure, but she knew that her role was to be was a 2-episode arc and was a temptress. And all I remember is when she left, the room broke down. And of course, you guys here in the Patreon see me in the Patreon. Well, I'm free to be a little crazy. I'm allowed to do it. I have fun doing it. Why not? The best example, of course, would be well, I actually did the equivalent when she left the room. I think I started doing push-ups or jumping jacks, running around in a circle, because she. But the point is that we had a lot of attractive actors, male and female, come through the rooms.
Sure. And
you really had to have the talent to pull the character off. She did, but she was. I will always remember her, and this is no knock on anybody else, as my biggest crush on any guest star that we ever had come through the door.
Fair enough. Okay, I am going to go to an interview with Paula Tricky, who played Dottie. She just conducted it with me, so that's why I'm sort of like slotting it in here to the interview. She says a lot of interesting things, so enjoy this one. All right, so 90210, you're an actor, you're working in the 90s, and you get this call for 90210. Was it an offer, or I think Chuck told me it was an audition?
It was an audition. Yeah, I auditioned with like 100 girls, and then they had me come in for a callback, but it took forever. It was like 2 weeks for a callback or something like that. Not like they turn it around now, but I asked my manager, I go, what's going on? You said I'd call back, but wait. And he goes, well, they have to check your background and this and that and whatever. It's a wholesome show. And I'm like, wholesome show?
The thing that they wrote was not wholesome.
No, not wholesome. So, and I guess I checked out, but when I went in there and I met the director, the first director, he said, you knew you had this wrapped up, didn't you? When you came in and auditioned. And I said, no, I had no idea. I had no clue whatsoever.
Charles Rosin was one of the executive producers. He's flying. Okay. He wanted to be here. He's flying to San Francisco. He just missed you. But
I'm so sorry.
He said that as soon as you walked in the room, they all knew. They were like, this is her. This is this Dottie. This is her. And they talked and they were excited about you and all that. I mean, what did you think of the script when you read it, that you're going to be this, flirting with Jim Walsh and all of this?
I thought it was hysterical. At first I wasn't I was like 24 or 25. This is like 30 years ago. But I thought it was hysterical, but I'm like, is this a flashback or is this not? I wasn't getting the whole concept of what they were doing. And, he goes into dream mode or whatever. So but I had so much fun. I mean, I walked in the makeup tray. Well, I got on set, and first person to come up to me and introduce themselves, even though I had no scenes with them, was Shannon Doherty.
Incredible. Super cool. Very
super
cool.
Yeah. So I'm in the makeup trailer. I've got stories, man. I like to throw people under the bus, but
go for it.
Tori already knows it. I didn't have any scenes with Tori, but Tori ended up becoming a good friend of mine because we went to Monte Carlo together.
Nice.
But Jenny Garth. So I walk up, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'm on the show. Ooh. And so I walk into the makeup trailer and I go, hi, I'm Paula. Nice to meet you. And I take, shake her hand or try to shake her hand. And she goes,
wow.
And just gives me the nose. Chill. Just no. She's sitting in her makeup trailer, just doing her, she didn't have a makeup artist around her. Nothing. Right. I thought, the rumors were that Shannon was the bad one.
Not at all, right? I mean, and it turns out your experience is that she was not so bad. Yeah.
She actually came across this, the set to come meet me, and I wasn't in any scenes with her, but she was cool, and that's when I first met Dean Cain.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm in the makeup trailer, and he walks in, and we look at each other, and at the exact same time, we both said, you could be my brother, sister. I mean, because we looked so much alike back then.
So how are the guys with you? Jason, and Luke, and all those?
They were great. They were great. I was very sad when Luke died.
I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah, my knees came up from underneath me when he passed away. I mean, I would see him at my friend Patrick Warburton, Putty from Seinfeld.
Yes.
So the big dumb guy.
I
so
love
Patty
him.
Oh, he's so funny.
Yeah.
You call his answering machine, it goes, "Dee." You know what to do. It's that big dumb voice.
right.
It's beep after that. But he would be at parties at Patty's, and then I almost did a movie with him. It was a smash up derby movie that it ended up not getting made. But I had heard Jason had a crush on me.
Probably.
Yeah. And I don't think Luke really cared, he would, but then our daughters going into middle school, they went to middle school together in the Valley. Yeah.
You and Luke's, you mean?
Yeah. But what's so funny is these guys are supposed to be in high school and they were older than me in my role.
That's right.
Some of them were, not all of them. I think Luke was older than me. And I think, I don't know, maybe Jason was, I don't know. I don't know.
That's funny.
On Friday and Saturday, the Hollywood show, and it's at the Hollywood Burbank Marriott, and it's the autograph show.
So you'll be there and signing autographs and taking pictures and all that fun stuff, right?
All of that. There's going to be a lot of people. What I saw from Star Trek, the original one.
Yeah.
And like Chips, I think Larry Wilcox and Eric Estrada were scheduled to be there. A few others. So I'm going to LA for 10 days, leaving tomorrow.
Very cool. All right. Yeah. This has been great. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, Paula. I wanted to ask you this, and we'll think of the best way to say this, but in the first season, there's an episode called The 17-Year Itch. We have talked about that a little bit, us and on the show, and sometimes it blurs if we talked about it off or on, but it wasn't a high ratings grab talking about the parents. I think that's fair to say.
Yes. Yes, so, and it was the episode we did transitioning out of the first producer, Jeffrey White, into Paul Wagner. So it was the one that felt there was a twin study in it, but just the idea being that the marriage was in trouble sounds better when on Knots Landing than it did on 90210. It wasn't a condition, because also looking back at the stuff now, in season one. Cindy was pretty uniformly an unhappy camper being in Beverly Hills. She often resorted to that almost throughout the high school years. Maybe by season 3, she had settled into the landscape. But certainly the first 2 years, her antipathy for being in Tinseltown and not Minnesota was evident. And so her, in the 17-Year Itch, running into her old boyfriend, in which she had a serious relationship with, and not sure if that was ever resolved. And those relationships are never resolved.
Right.
If I remember one member of our cast, I won't say who, told me that once you make love to a woman even in a casual way, that's just something you know about them and they know about you if you both been naked in a room.
Fair enough. Right.
These two people, Cindy and her boyfriend, had been naked in a room.
That's right.
And I think I think that, again, when we were working at Fox and under the administration of Barry Diller, the culture of that network was always something's wrong. Something needs to be fixed.
Right.
In fact, it was once we got to a point that it didn't need to be fixed, it almost didn't feel like Fox.
Right.
But in the beginning, but certainly Mr. Diller had gone by that point. So this was an episode that, whether it was the ratings or don't do adults or don't do, why do we have a housekeeper in it? All certain, which is so Beverly Hills. It was unfair. And again, really prohibited us from doing some pretty interesting storylines that I was aware of. I had even written a pilot prior to starting in 90210, one of the last ones I did for ABC, which was called Tullio and the Tall Tales of the 20th Century, which was about an illegal in LA.
Oh, interesting.
So I was real. There were a lot of stories to tell.
Yeah.
And we didn't get to tell too many of them. East Side Story, yes, but not too many others.
I bring up 17-Year Itch because it's parent driven. Ratings don't do well. You guys probably put your foot in the water there and said, I don't know if we should go back down this road with parents. But now this episode has a lot of parents. You know what I mean? And it's a lot of similar things. Jackie and Mel, only this time now Jim is having this midlife crisis thing. So it's okay now. What made it? How did it change?
Well,
and why,
remember that Mel and Jackie, their whole getting attracted to each other at the beach club, dating, finding out she's pregnant, getting married, all of these different things that occurred so we could see what the impact was on their children.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
This episode is off the beaten track a little bit because it is you have an A story, a B story, and then often a comedy runner. This was the comedy runner. And the only two people who seem to know or care about Jim Walsh's fantasies towards the Paula Tricky character was Cindy and Brandon.
Right.
So Brandon would start with he teased her. And that was and that was what you'd want, teased him.
About it. Yeah.
That's what you'd want the son to do. And yeah, Dad, hey, you're going into the office and I won't tell and whatever else.
Sure.
It's not just, I think if lines had been crossed then and he had found out and there was his mother upset, he would have jumped. He would not have been happy with
totally
his father,
different.
But he didn't. Yeah, but this was a different environment to that extent. And of course, then the other one was Cindy, and why? And Cindy, I think, was feeling at that point, which women in their middle-aged women here in Hollywood, in other towns, of course, particularly in the 90s, before there was vaginal rejuvenation. Felt that they were all over the hill, right?
Right.
And so we took that for Cindy, and as I think I commented on the Patreon, it sure worked. We needed her to be that way.
Sure.
But the question was, would she really have been that way? I mean, the fact is that Karen would go places out of town without me. I'd go places out of town without her, and you can either drive yourself crazy or have faith that your relationship and the family relationship you have is going to persevere, and you won't be sidetracked. Your partner won't be sidetracked by a beautiful body or a smiling face.
Right. I mean, and it's great stuff for James Eckhouse. It challenges him outside of most of his stuff was dealing with kids, right? But this is his own stuff that he would be going through. So I think it gave that character a little bit of something too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right? I absolutely agree. And also he brought humor to it. It allowed us to have a fantasy, because I think the episode before there were a lot of fantasies.
I think so. Yeah.
And this one just had the one.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and Brandon is also sort of grounded in reality that, he doesn't think that his dad is actually going to, have an affair with the Paula Tricky character.
No, he's just teasing.
He's teasing him. Right. Exactly. And even Steve gets in on the action at some point in the episode as well. Was there a book? I mean, we talked in the Patreon and I said, this seems to be a fictional book, but was there any book like this that had existed that you were aware of that you were referencing, or was it created for this? The book was created for this.
Created for it, although it was all how to remain youthful, and again, it's always for me, I would see men, like photographs of men my age in my 40s, 50s, 60s, very successful men, right? And I would look at guys, so I look at these men, these bankers, these people have done very well, and they were, often Wall Street people or Washington. They'd been with the FCC, very serious corporate executives, and they all look 15 years older than I did. Right. Because here we had the beach, here we had, it didn't have we had stresses, but they weren't the same kind of, I'm doing 20 hours in a row for, Shearson you know, so I need to or whatever it would be, Chase Bank, and I'm in the corporate division, and they all look so much older. So, you know, there was always that kind of thing of how to be youthful, more youthful, and certainly became a cottage industry, and no place was more involved with that than Southern California. This was the epicenter of that.
And you know, the Jim Walsh, back in the 90s too, what was kind of happening from what I remember is there was a lot more talk about this kind of self-help, reading this Oprah, you know, so this was sort of a part of the 90s culture that people were starting to talk about their feelings like this. I mean, I don't know that it was like that in the 60s and 70s. I think that this is a 90s thing that started to happen.
Well, no, it was late 60s, 70s. Esalen and counter groups. People started to do the feeling. What can you do? You know, expressing yourself, not being repressed, because, you know, if there's one thing that people reflect on, historians as well as people who lived there at the time, that the 1950s was homogeneous and repressed in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. But certainly those kind of, you know, 90s also yoga kind of had started around and taking over from massages. And so there was that, you know, all around us to take advantage, and the mother-daughters going to spas, you know, seemed like something kind of fresh and new. My daughter Maxine and her mother Karen have gone to spas together more than once, you know, because it's a good bonding kind of thing.
The four of them go to the spa. They try to convince Andre to go. Of course, she wants to cover it for the paper. That's the only reason you'll get her to do something like this. But it's great, and it's a really good bonding moment with Kelly and Brenda, because the two of them are still conflicted in this triangle, but they're in the weird place of the triangle now, because everybody's trying to get along, right? But and
I believe the episode either right before it was the one with the Princeton boys to men, and they basically say, you got to decide, or we don't, you know, you got to choose one to the other. They both say to Dylan at the end of that episode, which we played out in a comical way with Dylan playing the song at the jukebox, playing the old Loving Spoonful song, Did You Ever Have to Make Up Your Mind?
That's happening in this episode too. Yeah,
2 to 3 times. Of course, you wouldn't know that to watch it on
any
Hulu or anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
But that was the intention with the music, and that's what we, you know, and it makes for funny moments.
In the Patreon, you said that song, you had this situation happen to you, and that was a song that you listened to, right?
I did. But you know, what year was that? 1966. So a long time before.
Yes. And Nat can't stand the song at this point. It's funny. Nat is great in this episode as a comedy buffer in between. Something where the girls are at the spa, and there's a gossip that we were talking about, and the gossip tells a story about two women that have a you know, basically that the two girls lost their friendship over a guy. So it's playing like, now we understand, right, that this is us. Oh my God, Brenda even says, apologizes to her, and in that moment, Kelly is worried about her figure. But you told me in the Patreon that you knew where you were going with the figure, that her figure was going to come into with the diet pills, and so you dropped it here that earlier.
Right, because that was what you needed to do. You need to do that even if it was a single episode. You need to lay in the elements that are going to be used to then, you know, to twist the story and get to an interesting place. But you have to start somewhere. Just as we had already mentioned, this episode ends with the announcement that Jack McKay is getting out of prison. And so you know that's going to be followed up. That was very, very specific. But sometimes you just lay it in, and it's there for, you know, future reference. And certainly, it doesn't matter how long the story or character arc is. you still need to lay the groundwork and lay it pretty evenly and consistently. Otherwise, it seems very gratuitous. As I used to tell my writing students all the time, is this happening because it would be what the characters would be doing? Or is it happening because you need the characters to be doing this to get to your next point? The latter is not the way to go. You have to make it that you have to go to that extra step to make it not come out of the blue, but that you've actually, and you hear Larry talk about this so right, earn the right to tell that story, earn the right to get to that scene. And that was pretty important to us to keep the material feeling, at least have a semblance of being real in a show that was clear in a platform that was clearly a fictional television series.
But let's talk about Ann Gillespie here. We were watching it, and I mean, she really is pretty incredible, and her and Jenny have this really unique, special bond. I believe it. I believe that this is a mother and daughter. Talk to me about Ann and what you saw in this.
Well, she, as a character, I mean, Ann is a very, we now know her in real life and know what a strong person she is and what a principled person she is. But at this point, who knew she was someone, especially, when she's with this one person in the spa, her friend that she used to party with.
Babette.
And Kelly was aware that this was here and this could be an influence and everything else. And once through gossip, as we talked about, that it comes out of what's there. Kelly is immediately concerned that, oh my God, I've got to tell my mom, and she's going to use this as an excuse to go off the deep end.
All right, let's go to an interview that we've conducted with Ann about this episode right now.
Someone my age couldn't have looked as good as you did in the years that you did us, especially that first one when we just shot you in the bikini.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, I mean, nobody actually, I was playing a lot older than I actually was. So it's unfair for anybody to think that, Kelly's mom looked as good as she did and was actually old enough to have Kelly. So anyway.
Right.
Well, that's right. Well, you were playing yourself to be older. Everybody else in the entire building was playing themselves to be younger. You in James Eckhouse were playing to be older,
right.
and
That's
everybody else
funny.
was not. Yeah.
All right, so this is great. This episode, Midlife Now What, has a big Jackie storyline, and there's some heavy stuff that happens in it. I sent you the episode. Did you get a chance to watch it?
I did. Oh yes, it was really good because I remembered one or two scenes, but I didn't remember the whole episode, and I didn't remember all of what happened. And thank you for sending it. It was really an extraordinary thing. I was so moved, and I thought, this is incredible that on this show for teenagers, we're dealing with such real life stuff. And even, I mean, some of the most hilarious stuff in the show was Dylan's fantasies about what midlife would be, which of course were hilarious and ridiculous. But I thought the girls did such a great job with the comedy. And that was so beautifully offset by the real life stuff that was happening. Both in terms of the temptation, confusion stuff that James Eckhouse's character was going through, and what was really happening with, Jackie and Mel. So it was wonderful to see it again. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. When you looked back, were there scenes that you remembered shooting?
Oh, yes. The one that I remembered the most was the scene where I come in at the spa late at night and Kelly's asleep. And I remember how lovely that felt to play that scene with Jenny. And I think it was also, this may be sort of predating what I ended up doing in my life, but I was so happy that Jackie's character was able to make some healthy choices and to not succumb to the temptation to deal with this trauma through using drugs again, and that was lovely for me personally. But it was also, I just love this sort of just the relaxation that both of us, it was late night, that kind of late night conversation. And she says, why do men cheat? My character says, I don't know, maybe it's genetic. And it's also, now having lived through my own midlife times, it's very human. It's very human what relationships go through. And anyway, I just thought it was lovely that this was on a show for teenagers, that they might be able to contemplate some of the things that.
Well, Mr. Spelling, right from the start, from your first episode, Perfect Mom, liked it. So always said to me, but that episode made him so proud because we dealt with drug abuse, but it was the parents, and it was there to see how it impacts the kids.
Yes.
This is true here too. If you
Yes.
think about it, you're obviously married to a guy who has a big heart, but he also has a big libido.
Or ego that needs stroking, or whatever you want to say. Yes,
both one and the same. And that today we would not have heard the term sex addict very often, at least in those early 1990s.
Right.
Today we'd know exactly what we were talking about.
Yeah.
But so I think that was really, really interesting in that. And I also think that it's praising ourselves for 90210, how we just approached the universe.
Yes.
As I was saying this to Pete yesterday, that on most shows that were serialized, and when this was right before we were becoming serialized, and as you know, because you were back there when I was already out of the building,
Yes.
It became a soap opera. But what a soap opera would have done, and by the way, what 90210, I imagine in years after I left, Pete did, was that you would have taken the cocaine, and we would have seen that. And
Yes.
and my feeling is that that if you show somebody who's made mistakes, corrects those mistakes, and finds their inner strength,
Yeah.
you're showing a hero.
Yeah.
And so why not have people have a heroic response to it? And I had totally forgotten that element of it, and that scene that you described.
Yeah.
It was absolutely a real special feeling to it. And also I really feel that you got we were very moved, both Pete and I, and talked about it at length. The scene where you in the night where Kelly's going to tell you what happens, and we don't have to hear it again. And
that was such a cool effect of us walking off camera and you kind of watching it in the distance. It was beautiful. It was like film. It wasn't TV,
Right. Well, to that end, Pete knows that, my motto and creative motto is steal from the best. I took that moment, the first time I ever saw that moment on primetime, it was on the first season of Miami Vice.
Oh, was that right? So
it's a Michael Mann shot, and he did it with Edward James Olmos telling Crocker and Tibbs that their friend has just died.
The other thing I wanted to say to you is that there was such maturity in the writing, and to me, I don't remember if we ever dealt with it in other episodes, but Jackie and Mel end up staying together, which means they have worked something out. And that is very mature. If it was a soap opera, they would have split. There's no question, right?
True.
So,
well, you did split.
Oh, did we
did
split?
But then you get back. You do split, and then you get back. But you do get back together.
Okay.
You spent season 4 doing that, and the reason and then season 5 you got back together, and the reason to do that is that, and you know why we would have to do it that way, even if we didn't. I mean, we had the infidelity plot, so we would see the effect it would have on David and Kelly.
That's right.
So we and your baby Aaron and getting all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And again, that model that Mr. Spelling liked, but also the notion being when you have to do as many episodes as we did, break them up, bring them together, break them up, bring them together. That was, a few things I picked up from Aaron, Mr. Spelling, and of course that was one of them.
I want to ask you back to that moment that Chuck was talking about with doing the scene where we see it happen. Kelly tells you what happened, and you just react. It's just reaction. So it's an interesting thing for an actor to do, right?
It is.
Talk to me from an actor's perspective of doing a scene like that, as opposed to maybe having the dialogue and having to get in. Yeah.
Right. And having a camera in your face as opposed to knowing the camera's, 20 yards away. Well, as I've said this every time I do one of these interviews, but working with Jenny was always a complete and total delight. We enjoyed each other as humans, but really enjoyed acting with each other too. And so it was an easy thing to just sort of keep ad-libbing, right, as we're going on, and then to sort of have this moment where she actually did tell me what was going on, and we embraced. I sat down. I remember feeling like, oh, my legs are giving out. And anyway, it's one of those gifts, I would say, of acting that you could fake it, right? I mean, acting is all pretend anyway, but there was something about giving ourselves over to it that I think is part of what carried it. It wasn't just that you couldn't hear it and it was sort of dramatic looking. I'd like to think it was also how we were embodying it as we were experiencing it.
It is really an awesome performance. You do this thing where like the weight of everything hits you and your knees buckle almost, as you said, and you kind of, I mean, it was really incredible work. I wanted to ask you touched on Jenny and working together. I mean, I'm curious. I was always curious from the parents' perspective, or the other actors that were playing parents.
Yes.
They at this point in this show are huge stars. I mean, they're everywhere. They're on Rolling Stone. They're on Arsenio and all of this stuff. Is it a challenge? I mean, I don't know if it's a challenge is the right word, but you have to do scenes together, and you do have this really pretty stuff with each other. I mean, the moment that you talked about earlier is, I mean, Charles and I were just, this is absolutely beautiful. So how do you get into scenes with someone like that, who is a young kid dealing with all of these outside elements?
Right. Well, I mean, I feel like I was this little fly on the wall that watched the kids go through this incredible transformation. And it was both exciting and a little terrifying for them, and hearing their stories. And, I never, ever felt like any of them kept me at arm's length in any way as their fame increased. They were still the same people. What I did start to see is the ways they had to protect themselves, right? I mean, Jenny would tell me stories about taking her daughter to the mall or something, or going to the mall. And I was like, how do you do that? And she said, basically I put on my sunglasses and my don't F with me face, and I go out there. And so it was, as I say that, I mean, that was, I was sorry in a way. I mean, excited for them that the show was such a success, but it was not an easy path. And it made me not want to seek that kind of notoriety. I'm a super private person. I'm not into that kind of thing. I know some people are really, really good at it. And I'm not one of them. So that was also sort of a cautionary tale for me, but I never felt like I couldn't reach any one of them, or couldn't, they always had time for me. They were always incredibly courteous and to me. And,
well, why wouldn't they be? They were they knew you. You
Yes.
knew them. You knew them as people before they were stars.
Yes.
I always say it's so much easier to be an actor than a star.
Yes. Oh
I
my
mean,
God. Yes. Yes.
You make that trade.
It's a little bit of a pact with the devil in a way, I think, just because you give up your privacy. I mean, just the tiny bit of it that I had because of the show, taking my kids to Toys R Us and suddenly being surrounded by people that wanted my autograph with my children there, that felt like a real invasion. And, you know, obviously people learn how to deal with it, and they all did. But, you know, they were young to begin with, and they, you know, I mean, their brains, a lot of them, their brains weren't fully developed, right? They weren't even like 26 is when your brain's fully developed, and they're having to deal with this kind of fame. And I'm sure it was overwhelming and heady in the way that it is, you know?
Well, Jason gave me the only real the insight on stardom right as I was leaving the show, and I love that fact there was a dinner at the last episode I did at down the one in Palm Springs, and to end season 5, and he said to me that when you're a star, you become who you're allowed to become who you really are, for better or worse.
Right.
You lose all the inhibitors. You can be nasty. So there'll be, like, I don't mean to knock this person, but I did know her assistant. And her assistant was this wonderful, wonderfully bright woman who went to Princeton. And no offense, Leah Michelle, but you treated her really badly. And she has a very bad reputation of what stardom did to her. No offense. I'm just saying that's a classic example of, you know, what can happen outside of our 90210 context here.
I think that is tough stuff to deal with. I think it takes a really rooted, balanced person to not begin to believe your own PR. And that's hard. I mean, we've seen it over and over and over again. You see it. And then you also see some people who, like, you know, I mean, I don't know if this story is true or not, but I loved hearing it, is that Meryl Streep always did her own ironing, right? Like, she could have sent the ironing out, of course,
right?
But she just liked to just do her own ironing, and I'm like, well, I don't even do my own ironing right now. but anyway, there's something about staying in the daily, in the quotidian activities of living that I think very much helps to counteract the. I remember Jim Carrey once saying something in an interview like, you know, it's really hard to take out the garbage when you think you're like the biggest thing in the planet. He was actually,
yeah. Well, you know, with Meryl Streep, of course, she kept ironing just in case the acting thing didn't work out.
Yeah, very smart for her.
I want to ask you about the character of Jackie. She's very complex. There's a lot of history. There's the drugs, like Chuck referenced the Perfect Mom episode, and now, of course, Mel with the infidelity in this episode. Where are you going to as an actor at that time to, you know, I don't know, feel some of this stuff?
Well, I was a child that came of age in the 60s and 70s, late 60s and 70s. And, you know, I did a fair amount of drugs myself. Thank goodness it never got out of control, or I shouldn't say it didn't prevent me from living. It didn't ruin any relationships. And
it wasn't Jackie level.
No,
right.
No. I was more of a pothead.
Sure.
But I have a lot of familiarity with alcoholism. My brother ended up committing suicide. He was a lifelong alcoholic. And so, you know, where I went as an actor is to sort of channel some of the anxiety. You know, I think he really was somebody that should have been on anti-anxiety medication and was self-medicating through alcohol. And he had a very traumatic beginning. He was adopted into our family and had several different foster mothers. So there were huge sort of holes in his heart that I'm speaking metaphorically, but that just couldn't get filled up.
Right.
And so, you know, I'm very both sympathetic and kind of wary around that level of addiction because I've lived it. I've lived close to it, and it's very painful for everybody. And it's an insidious disease, and not everybody can get themselves out. And that's the problem. And that's why I was so grateful, at least in this part of Jackie's arc, that she was able to get herself out when the character recurred in the new iteration of 90210. they brought Jackie in again, and she was back being a horrible mom and drinking and
of course they did, because they had no creative imagination.
Well,
I got interviewed. I don't think the people.
Well, maybe, who knows? Here we go.
But this is the truth. When that second show came,
yeah,
and they chose, and I wasn't expecting to be involved with it at all on any level, but nonetheless, I remember the New York Times guy did a big article about the fact it was coming back and this, right. And he asked, I was interviewed for it, and what I said was that, and why I thought that show was incredibly bogus. It is 2008. America is about to elect Barack Obama.
Right.
And you have not even a mention of what's going on. So you weren't interested in what kids were thinking or doing. Right. You were interested in showing Jackie Taylor as a drug addict.
Well,
that was that paucity of information. And by the way, I know the first showrunners got fired almost very soon. And the second group was no better. And I think that, really, one of the things that why when you see a show and people come back to it, like I never got into Dexter because I wasn't interested in a serial killer. Yeah. But at the same time, I knew the guy who ran the show. And I knew the guy who was fired from running the show at one point. Mm-hmm. And now they do the new incantation and he's back.
Yeah.
Mm. And the thing I'll say about the difference between him and the other ones who were there is that he truly loved the characters.
Yeah.
And you really can't do that unless you have that feeling. As well as I've never met Shonda Rhimes, but that she loved the characters that she created on Grey's. And they've lasted and the whole thing has lasted for 20 years. One of the most successful shows in the history of television.
And on that note about the new 90210, were you conflicted about returning to the character because of those reasons?
I was actually. So in my own life, I had become a priest, and they had a hard time finding me because I didn't have an agent anymore. I mean, it was just this wild thing that I get this email that's saying, "Hey, we've been looking for you. We've written these scripts that you're in." And I'm like, well, I don't have room in my life actually to do this. I live in Virginia now. I don't live in LA. And they, I guess, wanted the character enough to help set up, I guess, some of the tension for the two sisters, Silver and Jenny's character, Kelly, that they were willing to put all of my scenes for several episodes in a single trip so that I could just only come out a few times. And so that was interesting. And I was concerned about the fact that Jackie was drinking again. And I wanted there to be some kind of healing and wholeness that was at least, or redemption or something. And they did eventually write that into the storyline, that she gets cancer, she gets sober, and reconciles with her daughters before they killed her off. So
before they killed her off, yeah. Yes. Well, in our world, she's still doing okay.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I will say this.
What do you mean they killed you off?
They killed Jackie Taylor
in a gun thing?
No,
no,
cancer.
I got cancer.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of imagination goes into those storylines.
Well, anyway, so I will say, playing the sort of bedside goodbye with Jenny was very, very powerful, because we had known each other at that point for 19 years. And we did 10 years, right, on the first one, and 2 seasons of the second one. And it was quite lovely. I knew I probably would never see her in person again. And there was just sort of this gorgeous moment of coming together of Jackie and Kelly and Ann and Jenny. It was one of those really lovely things to play. And the other thing is that by that time in my career as a priest, I had quite a few parishioners who had died of cancer. And so in some ways I was inviting their spirits to be with me at the bedside so that I could, sort of full circle, let them be present, So
absolutely.
Pete, make sure that you send our conversation here to Jenny. I think
I
she
will for sure.
see it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. And I almost called you Jackie. Sorry.
That's
I'm
fine.
sure it happens. Yeah. And this has been great. Thank you so much for your insight here. This has been
You're
awesome.
welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
It's always great seeing Ann, isn't it, Charles?
Oh, absolutely. You know, she was somebody, and I've told this story before. You know, I was surprised that someone like her would even come in to read for us. I mean, because she had worked for Stephen Bochco, who was the top of the food chain,
Right?
And cast by a A-list director. Now, I had no idea that A-list director was her brother-in-law, but
Right.
I figured if the A-list director cast her, I'll cast her. And I'm sure happy that she had a good brother-in-law at the time, because she was great to meet. She has a real strong personal relationship still, I think, with Carol Potter.
Yes.
And I believe Matthew Lawrence too, actually. So
yes.
Yeah, so it was great. Always great to talk to her and get her insights on the character she had to play. And at the time, and knowing that she has actually become a
minister.
Minister. I knew I was grappling. Oh no, I can't say priest. That's Catholic.
Priest, preacher, minister. I didn't know which one you were going to
Preacher,
go.
minister is good, but
Yeah.
that because she has that, you know, that the moral values of the character that she played very vastly different than who
definitely.
she was.
We talked a little bit about this. You writing actions. Kelly even looking at saying so much without saying anything, by knowing that Babette is trouble. You know what I mean? But she doesn't need to say, "Mom, why are you talking to Babette? You know she's trouble." Like, we just see it. And there's something really powerful about seeing that.
Right. And the key to that kind of thing is that you make it that it's not the focus of the scene. It's just a little item. If you saw it, you'll understand where it's going. And because it was only the first. If we had done that one and then in Act 1 and then jumped to Act 3 and had this, it wouldn't make it wouldn't make them a pressure. It would seem like it was just coming out of nowhere. But this was the first of the other steps laid in, so that Kelly explained the backstory of the relationships, and that this woman, you know, was one of her Coke friends,
Yes.
and that all of those kind of things just coming out. And but in the next act, so you're keeping the story alive.
Yes. Beautiful stuff. The chemistry between the two of them is fantastic. The other thing too that's happening here, we touched on it, is that Billy Vera is the bookie, and he's a friend of yours. But he's done so much great stuff with music. A lot of people don't know, but there's a Family Ties episode, and "What Would You Do at This Moment" is Billy Vera's song. Like, and we've talked to him about that in the Patreon. I'm going to play some clips here now of him talking about his experience on 90210.
So you come into our show and you came in first. We had just watched it. You played a bookie. We shot out at Santa Anita Racetrack. Yeah. But at that point, we didn't have any notion that you'd be coming back to be a recurring role. That's right? Because the Brandon Walsh becoming a degenerate gambler didn't really happen until season 3.
Right.
What do you remember about now? Did you know Joey Tata before you started working on our show? The guy who played Nat?
I didn't know. No, I did not. He was very nice to me, though.
Oh God, you guys were like soul brothers. You guys really natural.
He just latched on to me, and he was the adult in the room, so to speak.
Exactly.
As if any actors are adults, but it was nice. But the kid that played Brandon, he was really nice. Jason.
Yeah.
Jason Priest. Yes.
Very nice. So I remember you came on set. I think the first or second day I was there, and you were talking to me, and you looked around and you said, "Oh, you get to work with the nice ones."
I just meant they were nice to me. I don't want to imply that the
I probably shouldn't have said that.
No, that's one of the great things. You can even use the F word, Bill. Pete is a equal opportunity offender.
Absolutely. Yes.
And if I say something really like shitty about someone, he just cuts it. So he's fine. But the fact of the matter is that once Brandon gets over that number to you, and whether that number back in the day was $500 or $1,000 or 20, whatever it was, $2,500, there's a certain number that every bookie, that's the end of the tolerance. That's the end of the carry, as it were. And what I remember about the one where you came to collect your due is how you, without doing anything, were able to project menace. You didn't put your fist up. You just
no screaming.
You don't do that. I growing up where I grew up, my friend's Uncle Phil, who was known as King Farouk, was the head of the Northern Westchester mob. And sometimes we would go with him. In White Plains, they had these gambling dens. They were usually on the second floor on Main Street, and he'd go up there to collect. He had to show his face, and sometimes my friend Crazy Joe and I, we'd follow behind him with these bags full of money. I mean, all kinds of money, right? And Uncle Phil, he was like that. He didn't raise his voice. He just showed up. He kept a pretty straight face most of the time, maybe a little smile here and there. And so he was kind of my inspiration for Duke, portraying Duke. Yeah.
I know what Pete always asks, so I'm gonna jump in and do it. So you do this role, and you're on our show. That period of time in the '90s, did people come up to you and say, "Are you Duke, the bookie?"
A couple of times, Yeah, I mean, or it would be more like, "Oh, Billy, man, some stranger. I saw you on 90210." And 90210 was one of the more popular shows on television at that time.
Especially then, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't like some Here Today, Gone Tomorrow stupid sitcom.
We wouldn't. It's 30 years later. We wouldn't be talking if it was.
Right. That's right. No, I mean, some of the things I did at that period were, totally forgotten. Sometimes forgotten by me. And somebody said, "You were in such and such." I said, "I think I was." What? The 90210 was. I mean, it was. It was like Family Ties. In a sense, which of course that brought me some success as well.
You did the music for one, didn't you?
I did. Well, here's the story on that.
I have a clip of that. Let me show you this real quick.
He's got a clip of Family Ties, not a 90210.
Todd, I do have that too, but Todd just sent me this, so let me see.
Oh, nice.
I would do at this moment.
Well, anyway, so this is the song. This is the moment. This is one, like, growing up, I watched this show in the 80s, and that moment, I mean, that's how one of the ways I tie that song is through Family Ties. How did Family Ties come about for you?
Well, I was sitting around my living room on Sycamore, right above Beverly Boulevard at the time, near the New Beverly Theater. And my phone rings, and a guy says, "Is this the Billy Vera that has the band?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, good. My name's Michael Whitehorn, and I produce and write."
I know Michael.
Yeah. He said, "We were at the club the other night, and we heard you do a song that we thought might be perfect for an episode we have coming up." And when we figured out what the song was, and I told him to make a deal with my publisher, Warner Brothers Music, and I get a bag full of mail. Now, I had a number of songs on TV shows before, and you make a few bucks, and it's nice, but never got mail. So people respond to this song. Maybe I ought to see if I can get it re-released. Nobody was interested. Finally, I'm talking to a friend of mine, Richard Foos, who owned a label called Rhino Records.
Rhino Records, Pete?
Yeah.
They're Beverly Hills guys.
Yeah.
Foos Brothers.
So I said, "How many records you need to sell to break even, Richard?" And he said, "Oh, a couple of thousand. We have low overhead here." I said, what if I guarantee you 2,000? Would you put out this song on an album? He said, and he only did it because he liked me. You know, he never thought he'd make a nickel off of it. So by the time he got the album out, it was the next season, and they used the song again when the girl breaks up with Michael J. Fox.
That's where everyone remembers it. That's so.
And that's when NBC said they got more calls than any time in the history of the network. And people start calling radio stations, record stores. Who's the singer? What's the name of the song? Where can we buy it? And the thing ends up the #1 record in the country. And it changed my life, literally. And that's basically how it happened, you know. Another thing is I got to sing a couple of theme songs on TV shows. Empty Nest was the first one. But the one that really made the big bucks and was like having a hit record, I sang the theme song to King of Queens. And that show was on 9 years.
Yeah.
Now, as we speak, it's playing somewhere in the world. And for which I get paid, dude. You know.
It's incredible. You know, I was at a karaoke bar one time, and a guy, he was breaking up with his girlfriend, just the whole tie-in of Family Ties. He sang at this moment. He was on his knees. He was emotional. He started crying. The whole room lit up and applauded this man. You know, he was drunk out of his mind. This is not what you intended when you wrote the song. But wow, it is really a part of the culture.
We had a conversation a couple of weeks ago. In case you've forgotten, maybe I should refresh your memory.
No, I remember what you said.
And where's my money? I said I'd let you slide one time and one time only.
And I paid you every cent.
That was the last time. Where's the money you owe me now?
I'll get it. I just need a few days, Duke.
I like you. I do. But this guy in my car, that's Tony. And Tony, he isn't like anybody.
You don't like nobody.
So, you know how much you owe us, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of money, kid. You got till Friday.
But that delivery of how you deliver that, like you said, Chuck, there isn't a Goodfellas vibe here. It's just subtle, calm, and you really brought something like where you knew, like you said, that Brandon was in big trouble here. You know?
Yeah, because if we had written for Billy and we're going to mess you up, well, then he's a bad guy. Then he's not real. Then it's something else. But to just point to a guy in the car and say he don't like nobody. Says a lot without having to overkill.
Well, that's how those guys are. You know, I mean, when I started out in the early '60s playing those clubs on Times Square and everywhere, the mob guys they owned every club, you know,
Yeah, sure.
And they were more like that than what you see on television and in these corny movies.
Yeah, exactly.
Billy, the fans of this will want me to ask this question, but they did bring, after Chuck left, they brought the Duke character back to 90210 in the later years. Did they ever approach you to be Duke again? They recasted it and had somebody else play Duke. But
no, I honestly don't remember. Maybe I was.
No, I can answer that, Pete. Whatever year it was, they wouldn't have brought Billy back, because to bring Billy back would have to acknowledge there was a really good television show before those guys ran it into the ground.
Right. Yes.
See, Billy, that can say anything on our podcast.
That was great that we got to talk to Billy. That was a while ago that we talked to him. Casting Billy Vera as the bookie, I have to tell you, this is fantastic. He has this old soul. He comes across as the bookie. Tell me about how you were made aware of Billy Vera, and he lived near you, right?
He lived directly behind me in a part of town called Carthay Circle, which is around the County Art Museum around Fairfax in Wilshire. And Billy had already been, a pretty well-known rocker at that point, and session man and songwriter and in that world. We had a mutual friend, and I would see him at that friend's birthday parties or things like that that we'd go to at the time. And And I can't remember if he said, "I'm acting now, use me," or he walked in a room, "Oh, you're an actor too."
Right.
But the fact of the matter is that we scored.
Big time.
Very good in the part.
The idea that Brandon is gambling. Brandon is not a character that has many vices. He tried to drink once. He smashed his car. You know what I mean? So he's someone that doesn't really get tempted by things, but maybe girls, you know. But the idea about the gambling itself, where did that sort of come from?
Well, I think he gets tempted, and I think he is tempted by it all.
Sure.
He just has to overcome the temptation.
Sure, because there's even drugs and
but if you're somebody who has a drinking problem because you can't hold your alcohol, even though we just touched on it real briefly in one episode, you have to assume that maybe when they Minnesota, he also liked drinking Ham's beer and drank too much or whatever it would be. But that, someone who's addicted to something can also then get addicted to something else, even if it's just being addicted to watching, Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Just, you get into these.
Addicted to watching Beverly Hills 90210.
Yeah, that one too.
There you go.
So you get into that kind of pattern, and so I think it is valid that he would do that. And gambling is one of those things that you don't associate. Most people won't associate with high school.
Right.
I definitely associate it with high school because I remember very well in my senior year in the history class, the civics class, there was a whole bunch of guys who'd sit in the back of the room, including our star basketball player at the time. And instead of listening about the how the Constitution is put together, they would be looking at the racing forms, because these guys would take off to either Santa Anita, or Hollywood Park right after lunch if they didn't have sports practice. And when it was out of season, you did not have sports practice. So in the fall, the basketball player would go out to Santa Anita, and in the spring, the football players would go down to Hollywood Park because they weren't obligated to be at practice and stay after school. And so, that notion of betting on the, was right there. It didn't have a teenage bookie, but nonetheless, the topic was always in the news back then. And so we just took advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be something really great for a few episodes for Brandon.
Right. And it was interesting. We used basketball and not football because betting on basketball is more fool's errand than betting on football.
I think that even comes up a couple of times. I think Steve tells Brandon that at some point, maybe in the next episode when he really gets in,
right?
That it's a sucker's bet, and
it is. It is. I think it remains. Just like an over/under is a sucker's bet. You have to be really good at that to know.
And then the ending, of course, with as we talked about and speculated, where we now know that Jack McKay is coming out of jail. That's the big beat that you want everybody to be left with. That's the cliffhanger, I guess, if we want to use that phrase. But because now we're going to see what's going to happen with the return of Jack McKay.
Well, that's what we knew they would be talking about on the boards at Prodigy. We knew that was what was going to get them. And it also, it also leans into the serialized, more melodramatic storylines where we're going and deeper ones, and you could tell right then. So, you had commented on the Patreon, Dylan didn't have too much to do this episode. He was just in the peach
hung
pit
out in the
all
peach
day.
pit.
Although the one thing we didn't talk about is that when he's thinking about you have to make up your mind, he did have fantasies with both Brenda and Kelly. Brenda was, the barefoot and pregnant with 5 kids in the Walsh house, and Kelly was just a walking credit card. It's
interesting though. I didn't think about this on the Patreon, but they are very different lifestyles, and depending on where you stand on this in this triangle, as we have our super fans that are Team Brenda or Team Kelly, maybe it's appealing to think as the Team Brenda, 6 kids in the house and the whole nine, like he would have been happier in that lifestyle than the other one where he's going through all of his money and tearing up credit cards. I don't know. I mean,
I think there is a downside to each.
Fair enough.
That's all we showed, you know.
Yes, exactly.
Not anything else about the relationships.
Yes.
And also they were fantasies. So.
Right. Well, and there's I love the use of fantasy in this episode because there's 3. There's this, and then of course Jim Walsh's fantasy when he thinks that she's coming on to him, and then I love that you literally must have the same conversation, you know, with Paula Trickey's character, but she's just not hitting on him. She's going in somewhere with her boyfriend, and back to reality, Jim Walsh. Right.
Back to Florida. They're getting married.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, this has been fun covering all of this. Really, really great episode. I mean, we're talking season 3. I mean, season 3 to me is some of the finest stuff that 90210 brings.
My favorite year. Even no question about it.
So many interesting things happening. The family and the parents and the kids and the triangles and the relationships, and it's really it's delivering in all ways. So
thank you, Pete.
Yeah. All right, man. This has been great. We will see everybody next week. And this is Beverly Hills 90210 Show.